All right. Well, we're going to kick this thing off. So, thank you to everyone for joining this emergency response program. My name is Troy Vosseller. I'm one of the co-founders of Generator. Let me turn my video on. Sorry about that. I'm one of the co-founders of Generator, and I'm really honored to be kicking things off. I'm also joined by some of my colleagues. So, my business partner, Joe Kirgues, on the line, my partner, Lauren, as well as my colleague, Patty. And then we're really fortunate to have our partner here in South Florida, Lucas Hernandez with Access South Florida. And Lucas will say some words here as well. To get things started, to give a little background on Generator, we are what's known as a startup accelerator. So for the last 8 years, we have been working with startup companies from across the United States to help them start, grow, raise venture capital, and create a lot of jobs and prosperity for all people involved. We're really fortunate as a result of having a really wide team that we can re-leverage our resources or reallocate our resources to help some additional small business owners, as well as nonprofits, freelancers, artists, creatives, independent contractors, as they try to navigate some of the unfortunate circumstances of this COVID-19 pandemic. So as a result, we at Generator have launched a series of emergency response programs. And so we're really happy to be launching this here today in South Florida. As mentioned in the introductory call, we're really fortunate to have a great partner in the form of Access South Florida. In a couple slides here, I'll get to the introduction and we'll get Lucas to describe a little bit more about that partnership and that initiative. A couple of housekeeping items. So if you're calling in, hopefully you can hear the audio, hopefully you can see my screen. But in addition, if you're having any trouble on this slide here, we do list the call-in phone number and the webinar ID. So if you need to call in, or if the software is not working on your laptop, your computer, or your phone, we do encourage folks to call in via the phone number and webinar ID. Throughout this webinar, we encourage folks on the line to type in questions that you have. So there's a Q&A box. Please type in any questions that you have in the Q&A box. We hope to answer as many as we can during the course of the webinar, but if not, our team will be answering those questions and making sure to follow up with any individual that has questions related to the content of this webinar. In addition, if you have any more nuanced or more specific questions, please feel free to email my colleague, Patty, Patty, at generator.com, either during the webinar or after the webinar. We want to make sure that there's a lot of one-on-one support and that we can help people with any questions that they have, both during the webinar and beyond. If you have any technology issues, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to diagnose or do any troubleshooting on the spot with those technology issues, but we are recording this webinar. So we make all of these webinars available on our website. When you go to generator.com and then click Emergency Response Program, we have a link to resources. And following today's webinar, we will be posting the recording of that in case you have any additional questions. So with that, I introduce myself. Again, I'm Troy Vosseller, co-founder of Generator. I'm joined by my business partner, Joe Kirgues. And then we're really excited to be partnered with Lucas, who's with Microsoft Philanthropies. And Lucas, I'll let you introduce yourself and talk about the Access partnership.
Thanks, Troy. I mean, ultimately, I think Generator, you guys are doing an amazing job across the country, just totally stopping what your normal day-to-day looks like to step up and support small businesses, which in our community in South Florida, this is the lifeblood of who we are. And our small business owners, I know you all have been getting to know them through the one-on-one sessions you've been providing, and that's another great resource that I would just plug here. But ultimately, I direct our work here in South Florida for Microsoft Philanthropies. In a normal environment, we focus on how do we sort of open up and broaden pathways to technology careers for residents of South Florida. And during this time, we mobilized in partnership with City Community Development and a coalition of 12 local nonprofits to create Access Helps. So accesshelps.org is a navigation resource. During this time, there's no shortage of information out there, and webinars are the new podcast, as Joe said, over Twitter, which I really appreciated. So navigation is really where we're trying to support. And in addition to the website, which provides individual and small business navigation support with all the various federal, state, and local relief efforts, we're also really thrilled to be partnering with Generator and a host of local partners as well to provide that one-on-one support for small businesses. So I hope you all, I'll put it here in the chat, but if you could take a moment to visit accesshelps.org, that should be a great resource for you and your families and your employees as well, to help them understand how they can support their family during this difficult time. So ultimately very, very privileged to be working with you all. And I just wanted to thank you again for your work.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Lucas. We appreciate your support through Microsoft and Access Helps. Again, here's the website, accesshelps.org, if you're interested in learning more about the various resources and programming that they offer. In addition, I've linked here on this slide is our generator.com /emergency response program. And again, we will be posting these webinars, and we already have other webinars for some other cities in which we've operated these programs that you can review as well, in addition to some links to decks that we'll be referencing here throughout this presentation. To give you a bit of an introduction to our emergency response program, it really falls into two buckets. So the first bucket are webinars. So you're sitting in here on the first webinar, but we'll have additional webinars, including on the CARES Act. So this covers a lot of the various federal stimulus programs for small business owners. A webinar on mental health and wellness, some folks from the Small Business Development Center, the SBDC. And then we have links to the on-demand webinar library. So you can look at past webinars like we've done in some other cities. And again, a lot of the topics are about 80% similar. So if you're interested in looking at more content, please do. But we will also be posting all of the South Florida webinars on that link as well. The second component, in addition to the webinars, is our one-on-one concierge service. So we want to go beyond just kind of a one-to-many format like these webinars are, but we want to make available free one-on-one consultations with any small business owner, any entrepreneur, any freelancer, any independent contractor or artist to speak with representatives from the Generator team. These are entirely free. We will have them available in both English and Spanish. I know I'm sitting in on about 10 of these one-on-one meetings later this afternoon, but if you haven't already, you will be receiving a link in your email with instructions on how to sign up for these free one-on-one consultations. The goal is that in case you have any questions that either you're not comfortable asking in a public setting, or maybe you have really unique circumstances and you want one-on-one advice and recommendations around what programs that you can apply for, please sign up for these one-on-one consultations. To start with, on this webinar, we want to give everyone a really broad overview of the various programming that exists at the highest level. The messaging that we want to confront is really around these 5 steps. So first, we encourage everyone to apply for an SBA Disaster Loan. So SBA stands for Small Business Administration. It is an agency of the federal government. SBA Disaster Loans are not new. They've existed for any sort of disaster that exists in our country, things like hurricanes or wildfires or droughts. But what's unique is that for the first time ever, every state is covered by a federal emergency declaration, which makes these disaster loans available to everyone in the United States. These are also referred to as economic injury disaster loans, or EIDL. So again, sometimes you'll see them referred to as either SBA Disaster Loan or EIDL. They're referring to the same thing. We've created a step-by-step guide with more instructions on exactly how you apply for that loan, and we'll have some additional slides here in this presentation to talk more about that. Another program that we encourage every entrepreneur to take advantage of is the Paycheck Protection Program, also referred to as PPP. This is a program that is backed by the federal government and the SBA. However, this program is administered by private banks. So we encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to go to your private bank and ask about applying for the PPP program. We've also included a link here where it says search for another bank. If your bank is not offering or not participating in the Paycheck Protection Program, we encourage you to search for another bank. To put a finer point on that, we encourage folks to apply for both of these programs. Apply for both the SBA Disaster Loan and the Paycheck Protection Program. We think it's the best way to increase your optionality, and you can ultimately decide later, for example, if you're not comfortable taking debt. But the good news is that most of these programs either provide grant funding or forgivable loans. So again, we encourage folks to apply for both. In addition, we have information about the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance for Sole Proprietors. My doorbell's ringing, sorry everyone. We have information for sole proprietors as it relates to unemployment insurance. So for the first time ever, unemployment is going to be made available for entrepreneurs, small business owners, self-employed, independent contractors, etc. And so we'll have some slides about that. Lastly, there are some specific resources in the state of Florida. So specifically, the state of Florida has created a small business bridge loan program, which we have a link to on this slide. And again, that could be another source of loan financing, especially in a bridge scenario to help your business stay afloat. To go into more depth on each of these, so starting with the CARES Act, the CARES Act included funding for a brand new Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. We're starting with that program because it's kind of it's the largest of the programs, and we think is most applicable to most of you here on this webinar. What this program allows for is you can take your average monthly payroll, so going back the past year, so go back 12 months, use that 12 months of payroll to calculate average monthly payroll. You multiply that by 2.5, and that's how big of a loan that you can receive from this PPP program. Now that loan can be completely forgiven as long as you use it on payroll for the next 8 weeks. So from the date you accept the loan, and as long as you use it to pay for payroll over the next 8 weeks, that portion of the loan, which hopefully is the entirety of the loan, will be 100% completely forgiven. So again, it's a really good program that we hope people are taking advantage of. The second, as part of the CARES Act, is the SBA Disaster Loan. So that's the EIDL program. As part of the CARES Act, they added a new loan advance, also called an emergency grant, of up to $10,000 per business that must be processed within 3 days. So up to $10,000 is available for every small business applicant. The law stipulated that that $10,000 needed to be processed within 3 days. Unfortunately, we're finding that none of those dollars have been processed yet. So unfortunately, the SBA is not able to keep up with the demand, and that money is not flowing yet. But we hope that it starts to flow soon. The biggest takeaway is that you should be applying for both of these programs, because as you can imagine, there's literally millions of businesses, because keep in mind, this includes independent contractors, freelancers, and self-employed individuals. There's literally millions of businesses that are applying for both of these programs. Both of these programs have a finite budget, so the sooner you get your place in line, the better. And again, the biggest concern that we have for small businesses is just this lag before some of this money starts flowing, and that these businesses can really get the financial relief that they need. So to go into more depth, again, on each of these programs, starting with the Paycheck Protection Program, this can be a maximum of $10 million. And again, the formula is taking your average monthly payroll and multiplying it by 2.5. So average monthly payroll times 2.5, that's the total amount of the loan. There are some additional caveats. For example, for each individual employee, compensation has to be capped at $100,000 for the purposes of calculating this loan. But as long as the loan is spent on qualifying expenses, so those include payroll, rent, commercial mortgage interest, and utilities, that loan can be completely forgiven. So it converts from a loan into a forgivable loan, which is the same thing as a grant. Another thing to keep in mind, in order to get that loan forgiveness, so in order to get that to qualify as a grant, you need to spend at least 75% of that loan on payroll. So by virtue of the name, this is called the Paycheck Protection Program. The goal of this is to keep paychecks flowing to your employees, even if your business has closed or you're legally not able to operate. Again, this is meant to pay people no matter what, even if they can work or if they cannot work. The purpose of this program is to keep paychecks flowing. Beyond that, for the portion that's not forgivable, the interest rate is only 1%, which again is very favorable. And there are no personal guarantees or collateral required. So we get asked this question quite a bit. There's no personal guarantee, there's no collateral required for the Paycheck Protection Program. Second piece is the SBA Disaster Loan. Again, that's referred to as EIDL. For those, in addition to the $10,000 emergency grant or loan advance, entrepreneurs and small business owners are eligible for up to a $2 million loan. Now, again, there's millions and millions of small businesses in line. So the process is that first you apply online, ultimately you'll be attached to a loan officer. But unfortunately, this process is taking much longer than anyone anticipated. So that's even more reason to apply right away to get your place in line. To kind of recap, and again, we're going to go into more depth on each of these programs. If you're a sole proprietor, a freelancer, a gig worker, an artist, a creative, an independent contractor, our advice is that you should be applying for all these programs. You should apply for the SBA Disaster Loan and work with your private bank to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program, and look into unemployment insurance, and look into the Florida Bridge Loan if you qualify based on their eligibility. If you're a small business or a nonprofit, again, you should be taking these exact same steps. You should be applying for the Paycheck Protection Program, applying for the SBA Disaster Loan. You should be looking into unemployment insurance, and for small businesses, looking into the Florida Small Business Bridge Loan Program. Going to the Paycheck Protection Program a little bit more, again, these loans can be up to $10 million. It's that formula of average monthly payroll times 2.5. Generally speaking, eligibility is limited to business with fewer than 500 employees. And the proceeds of that loan can be spent on payroll, rent and commercial mortgage interest, and utilities. The loan forgiveness, again, one key requirement is that at least 75% of that loan that you receive must be spent on payroll. The application, there's an application form via this link here. You will have to fill out that form, but ultimately you will work with your bank. So first you should find your bank and contact them, ask them if they're participating in the PPP program, and then go from there. They will ask you most likely to submit that paper PDF application. Some banks, however, have created an online version of that application. So first step always should be going to your bank. These PPP loans do not require a personal guarantee. They do not require collateral. You do not have to certify that you cannot get credit elsewhere, and there's no prepayment penalty. So there's a lot of benefits to this program. And again, as long as you keep the payroll flowing over the next 8 weeks, this loan will be completely forgiven. There are a few limitations. One thing to be aware of, and again, you can look at the actual 2-page loan application. You will need to certify that this loan is necessary for your business to continue. Again, that's going to be a personal point that you're going to have to look at and certify and attest. But again, for most businesses that are seeing severe economic downturn or businesses that are legally forced to close, that's the purpose of this program, is to help you keep not only your business afloat, but help you continue to pay your employees. Beyond that, I mean, for the part that's not forgiven, it's this very low 1% interest rate, and that the remainder of that loan can be paid over 2 years. Shifting gears to the SBA Disaster Loan. So this is also referred to as the EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This is the program that includes the emergency grants of up to $10,000. Again, we're still waiting on the SBA to get their process finalized so that they can start issuing those emergency grants. Originally, the law had said that they must do that within 3 days. Unfortunately, that has not happened. But again, our strong advice is that you apply right away if you have not already, to get your place in line. Beyond the up to $10,000 emergency grant, small businesses will be eligible for loans of up to $2 million. For a small business, the interest rate is 3.75%. For a nonprofit organization, it's 2.75%. These loans typically have a 15-year term, so even longer. And in some cases, they are allowed to have a maximum term of up to 30 years. And down here on the bottom, we have a link to that application. For these SBA disaster loans, they will look at your credit score. It's our understanding that they're going to have a much broader viewpoint on that. By definition, these are meant to be disaster loans. So they're trying to be as broad as possible in terms of the small business owners that they can help and support with these loans. And again, the key part about applying for these is that you can get up to $10,000 as a loan advance, which is in the form of a grant. The second to last thing that we want to discuss here on this introductory webinar is the pandemic unemployment assistance. So this is, for the first time in a long time, a very significant change to our federal unemployment laws. Historically, self-employed individuals, so if you own a business, if you're an independent contractor, if you're a sole proprietor, you would not have been eligible for unemployment assistance. Now, however, at the federal level and then at the state level, you will be eligible. So what the federal government is providing is an additional weekly compensation of $600 for an extended window of time. So again, if you are currently unemployed, or if you're self-employed and you're unable to operate your business and therefore you are unemployed, we encourage you to go to the state of Florida website to see how soon they will start processing unemployment claims for self-employed individuals. This is taking a little bit longer than people had hoped for. Basically, the federal law was passed, and then each state had to come up with their own rules and processes for how to handle this. States are slowly coming online, but I anticipate this week is when most states, including Florida, will be in a position to start processing these unemployment claims from self-insured individuals. One thing to note, however, is that if you're claiming unemployment, you would not be able to then participate in the PPP program, because if you participate in the PPP program, by definition, you would have cash available to process payroll. In most circumstances, that PPP program is going to be a larger bucket of funding. But for example, if you're just an independent contractor and you're not able to operate your business, and maybe you don't have a strong basis for the PPP program, meaning you don't have a lot of income to create that average monthly payroll times 2.5 formula. In that case, you might be better served by the pandemic unemployment assistance. So something for you to look at. Lastly, specific to the state of Florida, there is a Florida Small Business Bridge Loan Program. This is available to small businesses, and there's some eligibility requirements. Again, we link to that eligibility and application information here on the slide, but that's another program at the state level. So it's not through the federal government, but rather a state program that we encourage everyone here to apply for. We've included some additional source links. So anything that we cited here in this deck, we include links to the official source where we got that information. And so we hope that's helpful. I do want to thank everyone for their patience here. I'm going to pull up some of the questions here. So the question is, what is the unemployment website to apply? So first, if you go to this covid19.floridajobs.org, there should be a link to the unemployment portal for folks to apply. If not, just go to floridajobs.org to be able to get a link to that. It looks like most of the other questions were answered here in the dialog box. I'm going to pull up the chat. If anyone else has one that you want to jump in with, go ahead.
Someone asked if the Florida Bridge Loan is asking for a personal guarantee.
That is a good question. I do have it, if you're still looking at my screen, I have the eligibility requirements. If I search guarantee, nothing comes up. So I'm not sure about that, but that'll be a question that we will research and make sure to get back to folks.
And then there's some questions around independent contractors. So if someone is employing a bunch of independent contractors and paying their employees that way, can you talk more about how they should go through the PPP program?
Sure. So for the purposes for PPP, again, the formula is you take your average monthly payroll and you multiply that by 2.5 to get the total PPP loan size. However, the requirements and regulations that came out say that payments that you make to independent contractors are not counted in that formula. So if you pay independent contractors instead of employees, you cannot count the payments to the independent contractors. Instead, what they provided for is that independent contractors on their own can apply for PPP. So if you are an independent contractor, either you receive a 1099 at the end of each year from various clients that you work with, or you report your income on a Schedule C of your Form 1040, you should apply for PPP on your own. So you should go to your bank right now, ask them if they're participating in PPP, and you can apply on your own. I think anything else that hasn't been answered yet? Lauren has been very furiously answering people on the chat, so I appreciate that.
More in the Q&A, Troy.
Q&A, all right. So I think this is a follow-up to the last question. So again, independent contractors can apply for PPP on their own. The next question is, how do we go about hiring them? Technically, you're not hiring them, but you are free to continue to contract with them to continue to pay them for services. However, those payments would not count against your loan forgiveness for PPP. So remember that for PPP, whatever loan amount you get, you must spend at least 75% of that on payroll in order for it to be forgiven. Payments that you make to an independent contractor would not count for purposes of that loan forgiveness. So again, it's very specific to actual employees or to yourself if you're self-employed. For the pandemic unemployment application, do you just send the same Florida unemployment application? Loosely, the answer is yes. So each state is figuring out their own internal processes for handling self-employed and independent contractor individuals. So my advice is to continue to check the state of Florida website as they build out the funnel for creating that. But at a fundamental level, you would apply just like any other employee that's applying for unemployment assistance, you would apply the same way. However, you would have to indicate that you're a self-employed individual. Some states have not yet rolled that out yet. So we will check with the state of Florida website to see if that's up and running yet. If not, I anticipate by the end of the week, it will be, because each state has been asked to get that up and running. Which loan would you recommend for a travel business? It's only myself, and I lost a lot of revenue from canceled trips. Currently, I'm funding business bills with my personal income. I would recommend the SBA Disaster Loan first. So make sure that that's also known as EIDL. I would make sure that you're applying for that, because then you can get up to a $10,000 grant, emergency grant. Secondly, I would make sure that you're applying for the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, with whatever bank you use for the business. And if that bank is not participating in PPP, I would encourage you to check with another bank. So both SBA Disaster Loan and Paycheck Protection Program. One question about you have a worker at your company who needs legal help to address child support issues so they can apply for the SBA. That brings up a good point. So for the SBA Disaster Loan, I know at least that loan, maybe PPP as well, there is a question about if you're late on child support payments and therefore eligible or ineligible for those various loan programs. That's going to be a question we'll have to follow up. I will check with some of the resources that we have from both law firms and law students that are volunteering their time pro bono to help. So we will make a note of that question and make sure to follow up. Next question is, I am both a business owner and an independent contractor. I am unable to apply for the PPP loan, but I can and have for EIDL. Can I still file for the, I believe they're asking for Florida unemployment, or would that be considered double dipping? So if you receive EIDL, those proceeds are unrestricted, so they don't have to be spent on payroll per se, in which case it'd be my understanding that you could still be considered unemployed if you're unable to have any income in the business, meaning if the business has shut down for business reasons, meaning your customers or suppliers are out of business or not purchasing or selling anything, or if via a local or state level quarantine order has been in place over your business, then you would be able to qualify for the new expanded pandemic unemployment assistance. More broadly, if you operate both, let's say you have a business that's an LLC and separately you're an independent contractor, in theory, you could be able to apply for both PPP and EIDL for both of those things. So both for your LLC on the business and for your other business that you operate as an independent contractor. Resources for undocumented folks or folks that have a prison record or on probation in the last 5 years. This is a great question. This is another one that we will have to follow up on. We will check with our law firm and law students about getting an answer to these questions in particular. The context of this question is that for both of these loan programs, you do have to indicate that there's some difference between the two, but there are some requirements around residency, not necessarily citizenship, but if you're a permanent resident or legally working under a visa in the United States, you are eligible. But this question is specific to undocumented folks. Secondly, there are certifications that you have to make around a criminal record. So these will be points that we'll make sure to follow up on. So please stay tuned. Nonprofit organization. Our organization has only applied for funding with salaries included. Where do we go for assistance? So the good news is that nonprofits are eligible for both the SBA Disaster Loan, so that's EIDL, and nonprofits are also eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. So my advice is that nonprofits, assuming they have employees, they should be applying for both EIDL and PPP. Is it true that the Florida Bridge Loan, you are repaying it with the other funds received? Really, you can repay it with any funds. It can be repaid with other income or revenue that you're generating. But you are correct that it's designed to be a bridge loan. It's designed to help people as they're navigating both the economic downturn and in most cases waiting on some of these other federal relief funding. So that's really the purpose of the bridge loan. Next question from Chad. How do we retain an independent contractor who we need services from but can't pay? Is it not a gap that independent contractors are applying for PPP but have no obligations to tell us they're getting it? Understood. So again, if you're a business, you cannot use payments to independent contractors for the purposes of loan forgiveness in the Paycheck Protection Program. Rather, independent contractors can apply for PPP on their own. Going to your question, that could mean that if you don't have the money, you might not be able to pay that independent contractor. That's correct. And furthermore, that independent contractor might be able to use money that you've previously paid them in order to get the PPP loan. And that you're correct that that independent contractor is not under any obligation to tell you if they receive that loan or not. Again, the purposes of the PPP program are for individuals, whether or not they actually work or perform services, but rather it's to continue paychecks and payments flowing regardless of whether there's work to be done or if work is even legally able to be doing if your business is not closed. I realize that that doesn't help you a whole lot. Unfortunately, if you are able to qualify for either EIDL, the broader SBA Disaster Loan, obviously you could use those funds to pay an independent contractor. But in theory, there is a scenario here where if historically you've paid an independent contractor for services and that independent contractor received PPP, there is a scenario in theory where they could double dip. That being said, in order to get the forgiveness, the independent contractor would need to show that they have continued to pay themselves, just in the same way that a small business would have to show that at least 75% of what they receive in the PPP loan is spent on payroll. Do we know of anyone who's received EIDL yet? No, we have not. Again, this is a huge, huge point of frustration. The law in the CARES Act stipulated that the SBA needed to process the EIDL loans, specifically the emergency grants of up to $10,000 within 3 days of loan application. We are not aware of any small business or nonprofit that has received EIDL funding yet. That is very frustrating. It's frustrating for us. It's frustrating for all of you. We are hopeful that those systems will come in place. Perhaps the silver lining is that there's been many very public articles in major national news publications that have shined a spotlight on that issue, and I'm hopeful that those funds will start flowing. What is the best website to provide product and services to the government? If you're talking about the federal government, I would just look up United States Purchasing. So there is an arm of the federal government specifically that focuses on purchasing from vendors and suppliers. At the state level, if you were to search a similar thing, I would look up state of Florida procurement or state of Florida programs for purchasing from small businesses for resources around that. What loan would you recommend for a landlord? So if you're a landlord and you operate that as a business, you are eligible for both of these programs. So again, SBA Disaster Loan and Paycheck Protection Program. My recommendation would be applying for both of those programs. In your case, certainly if you're not able to collect rent if you're not able to collect as much rent, you would be eligible for these programs as long as you meet the other criteria. So I can't speak for every individual circumstance, but on the surface, you would be eligible for both EIDL and the PPP. And then Chad's, any guidance on ways to retain independent contractors for work? I really don't, Chad, with the exception of if you qualify for the EIDL, if you qualify for the broader loan package of up to $2 million, you could use that to pay independent contractors. Separately, if you qualify for the PPP, in order to get the loan forgiveness, you have to spend 75% of it on payroll, and the other 25% has to be spent on utilities, commercial mortgage interest, or rent. However, if you choose to spend the PPP loan money on independent contractors, that would not qualify for loan forgiveness, but you could choose to do that, in which case it would just convert into a normal loan. That PPP loan would have a 2-year payback period and have an interest rate of 1%. So it's not unreasonable for you to consider doing that as well.
I'll add to that I think just using the informal power of saying that you'd like to keep working with them after, and their openness to working with you through the crisis, I think is informally compelling. So in the event that they are applying for PPP and using the PPP funds for self-forgiveness and therefore not required to do their traditional contracting work, I think still stating to them that this crisis will pass and you'd like to keep working with them and appreciate their efforts to continue to meet you more than halfway, or at least halfway. I think, don't limit yourself to the requirements of the rules in order to maintain the benefit of it. So we found that in other markets to be helpful. And if you have any specific questions, as always, you can feel free to follow up with email.
Can PPP loan be used for new employees? The answer is yes. So there is going to be a requirement that you need to maintain payroll from kind of before the pandemic and then after the 8 weeks. So you will need to maintain both the number of employees and the total amount of payroll. We're a little bit unclear on how if you were to reduce that, we're a little unclear on how they would reduce that, but there will be a reduction in loan forgiveness, in which case for any portion of the PPP loan that is not forgiven, it'll convert into a traditional loan at that 1% interest rate. But you can hire new employees, absolutely. So let's say, for example, let's say I had a business with one employee, and let's say that one employee either quit or they're not willing to come back to work, or maybe they're sick with coronavirus. In that case, you can hire new employees. And that would still mean that before I had one employee, afterward I had one employee, and I still paid out the same amount of payroll in that 8-week period. Esther asks, what if I am working but lost work because of COVID-19? For example, I'm an independent contractor and own my own doula business. Can I apply for all of the loan or grant programs? So first question, yeah. So in that case, if you're an independent contractor and you've lost out on business, you absolutely can apply for the SBA Disaster Loan, EIDL, and you can apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. For Paycheck Protection Program, you would just have, if you don't run payroll for yourself, they're going to look at any draws or distributions or net income that you have as an independent contractor for the purposes of calculating that average monthly payroll times 2.5. As for unemployment assistance, alternatively, as an independent contractor, you are eligible for unemployment. That would be based on a formula of your compensation plus an additional $600 per week that the federal government is supplying. Now, you couldn't take unemployment and get the PPP program because by definition, the PPP program is continuing to pay you. You could only qualify for unemployment assistance if you are no longer being paid. So again, that's going to have to be a decision that you would have to look into and choose one or the other. So with that, I believe, thank you everyone for tuning into this webinar. We're really excited to be working with Lucas and the Access Help team. We will have a series of additional webinars throughout the week, as well as one-on-one office hours that we're going to be offering for anyone interested. Those office hours, or I should call them one-on-one consultations, will be available in both English and Spanish.
We got 3 more, Troy. I'll do, while you're looking at those, I'll add one of the things. We're getting a lot of self-employed and independent contractors coming through in the question session. One thing that we want to stress is one area that I don't think a lot of webinars have covered, because I think they're targeting larger employers, is the effect of the new unemployment law on individuals such as yourselves. So I want to put it into 2 buckets. The first bucket is the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation Program, which was a part of the CARES Act, which created for the first time in the history of unemployment an additional $600 weekly stipend or weekly unemployment benefit for filants and claimants. That in and of itself does not directly impact self-employed freelancers, independent contractors. The second bucket does, however. The second bucket, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, for the first time really in unemployment history, extended this program into self-employed, freelance, gig economy, musicians, and artists. And when you put those 2 together, you have 0 to 180 mile an hour change in unemployment law for many of the commenters who've been asking questions here. For example, not only will you get the traditional unemployment compensation, which as a rule of thumb is about half of what you could demonstrate your income was, you'll also be eligible at a minimum for the $600 weekly stipend. So you're looking at $2,400 a month minimum. And then depending on how Florida interprets and implements the guidance about what they can use to determine what your compensation was and what you are eligible for, you may get an additional amount on top of that. So as you're looking both for people who may have been independent contractors of yours, as well as for potentially yourself, this program, as Troy noted, you can't be using the loan forgiveness provisions of the Paycheck Protection Program while using unemployment. But there are ways that you could use, for example, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan and this provision. And if you're operating outside of that 8-week loan forgiveness provision of the Paycheck Protection Program, you may be eligible for those 8 weeks to use the Paycheck Protection Program. And if the timing works out, you may also use the additional time to file for the unemployment, the additional pandemic unemployment assistance. So this is something I don't believe is understood within the small business, independent contractor, sole proprietor community, because it is a sea change from the status quo as recently as a month ago. And we've seen very little content explaining and merchandising this program in a small business context. But just given the volume of Q&A we've had from participants of that profile, I really strongly recommend, if you're in this bucket of sole proprietor or one-person company, or your company's been essentially shut down, that this might be an additional resource for you to examine on top of the bridge loan, on top of the Paycheck Protection Program, and on top of economic disaster loans. I'll let, hopefully, Troy, that sets the stage for if you want to do the other more.
So we got 4 last questions here. Diana asks, if you get the PPP as self-employed, but the establishment of operation is closed due to government order, or you can no longer pay rent, can I still pay myself and comply with the 8 weeks of pay to get loan forgiveness? The answer is yes. So as long as you are continuing to pay, if you're the only employee or if you're self-employed, as long as you continue to pay yourself in full, the full amount of that loan, you're completely fine in terms of 100% loan forgiveness. So if you take every dollar that you get in PPP and you pay it to yourself and you're the only employee or you're self-employed over those 8 weeks, you would qualify for loan forgiveness. Irene suggests that if you have really important or valued 1099 contractors, one idea is you could convert them to employees. So that is good advice. So if they're eligible and willing, you certainly could hire an independent contractor to become an employee, and then anything you pay them would qualify against the loan forgiveness. However, that doesn't mean you can't go back in time. You can't go retroactive and count your payments to them as a basis for the payroll formula in the PPP loan. Chad asks, are there any major changes or differences in the application, I presume unemployment application, for independent contractors or sole proprietors? Not that I know of. So my understanding is that each state will continue to have their own state-based unemployment application. The federal addition of $600 per week would just be added on top of that, but it still is going to be the state, it still is going to be the state who's cutting that check or providing you the total sum of unemployment. So there should not be a separate application. I would be surprised if there was at the state level, but we anticipate that there is not.
And Troy, what about within PPP?
Oh, no, for PPP. There is not, for PPP, the only distinction was that up until last Friday, April 10th, PPP was only for LLCs, corporations, and nonprofits, actual entities. Starting on April 10th, so starting last Friday, anyone, including self-employed, freelancers, independent contractors, self-employed, sole proprietors, can apply for PPP, and there is not a separate application. It is the same application. Can you use stimulus funds to pay for a small nonprofit to hire someone who has been laid off? Yes. So a nonprofit is eligible for EIDL and PPP. So if that nonprofit receives funds from either of those programs, they can hire someone who has been laid off, and those payments to them for the purposes of PPP would help qualify for their loan forgiveness. Diana asked, my company was in the process of converting from independently owned by me to a worker-owned co-op of 14 members. Are you able to provide support to a company like ours for those folks who want to convert from 1090 workers to owner workers now? So for both of the major federal loan programs, the requirement is that the business had to have been in place, and let's call it the employment structure had to have been in place on February 15th of 2020. So unfortunately, if that conversion has not happened yet formally, or it had not happened by February 15th, unfortunately, you would not be able to count those individuals as owners. If it happened between February 15th and let's say today, there might be a little bit of a gray area where you could qualify their basis The reason I say that is as long as the entity was created before February 15th, but now let's say you added a new owner to that entity between February 15th and today, there are provisions that allow you to kind of wait the payroll over a period of time. So this is true for seasonal businesses. So if you have a business that's seasonal in nature, you don't actually have to calculate average monthly payroll over 12 months. You can just look at the period of time when that business is seasonal. And similarly, my hope is that a bank would be willing to work with you to say, between March 1st or between February 15th and today, we now have a new set of employee owners. Can we count the payments to them for the purposes of our PPP application? Again, it's not a slam dunk. It's not black and white, but I would encourage you to try to work with your bank to get that as your basis. Where do you apply for the pandemic unemployment for self-employed individuals? You will be applying through the state employment through the state of Florida unemployment website. So there's not a separate portal for that. Rather, it's a federal program that's going to be funding the checks that the states issue for unemployment insurance. So you would be applying through the state unemployment website. So moving forward, I can continue or start paying my employees using PPP. Yes. So the purpose of PPP is to continue paying existing employees. It's also meant if you've laid employees off, you could rehire those employees, or if you are actually growing or you need to hire new employees, all of those would be eligible for the purposes of payroll for loan forgiveness under PPP. As for slides being available, we have put the link in the chat box for the slides. So make sure to check that if you're interested in seeing the slides. We will also be posting the recording of this webinar. Diana asks, my business is a new business. I started selling back in June of 2019 and paying myself since June. I didn't pay myself for the last couple of months. Can I still apply for PPP if I haven't paid myself for a full 12-month period? The answer is yes. So again, for businesses that have either recently formed and perhaps don't have 12 months of payroll, or in this case, self-employed, don't have 12 months of history, you only need to report the period of time where you have history, and you just need to provide your bank that commentary. So you just need to describe to your bank to exactly like you described in that question, Diana. You would say, hey, we've only been in business since June of 2019, so we don't quite have a full year. Instead, we're just going to use those 9 months, let's say, as the basis for calculating average monthly payroll. So it does provide for that. All right, so thanks again, everyone. I appreciate the time and everyone tuning into this webinar. We will be having more webinars throughout the week. Make sure to tune in. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the free one-on-one consultations with the Generator team. Those are happening in both English and Spanish. Thanks again. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy, and we will be providing a link to this recorded webinar on our Generator website as well.
We also believe there may be additional offerings of accounting resources that we may have available. If you have an accounting specific request that you would like us to address, or you feel like you'd like an accountant to help you with the different programs that are available, please follow up. Lauren just put on her email for a free one-on-one consultation. You can use that as well for requests for the accountant. As Lauren's also noting, we have the materials. We have one-on-one time available in Spanish. We can't encourage you enough. If you want to do one of these with our team, please pull the thread and sign up. It's all free. And finally, we do have on our resource page a number of these materials in Spanish, including a presentation very similar to the one today on the CARES Act. That is in Spanish. Also materials on the new federal employment laws under emergency family medical leave and tax credits, as well as the SBA Disaster Loan that are available on our resource page in Spanish. I know that Lauren posted those as well. So if you're interested in following up with the accounting resources, or if you're interested in reviewing the materials in Spanish, and finally, just the outstanding request from our team, please do sign up for a one-on-one so that we can help you, as these resources, they're all pretty overwhelming. We want to do our best to try to help you navigate them. And thank you to Access Helps for inviting us to be a part of this amazing program, and to Lucas and the entire team for making this program possible. Thank you.
Thank you all.